to the cloud. Great. There we go. Carl, it's all yours.
Okay, well, wow, this is pretty exciting, actually. And I know that Adrienne's going to be a little bit late to the meeting, so we can go ahead and just kind of have a general discussion right now. And Jennifer, I got a feeling you've got a couple people with you today, maybe one.
Yeah, yes, I do. Two so far. Mary Frances Bibb and Chris Ulabadi are two of my environmental geology students, and they're also classmates of Adrienne. So I was hoping we could attend the meeting in support of Adrienne, but also that they could experience your stakeholder meeting.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much. Now, Fred is the new engineering manager of the wastewater treatment plant for the city, and fairly new, but you have 25 years of experience, is what I believe you said. So where were you before here?
I was in Pennsylvania, Gettysburg. I worked as a consulting engineer there for 25 years for a small consulting company that worked with local government and private entities. Before that, I worked at a treatment plant as an operator, and prior to that, I worked as a researcher for a large treatment district in southeastern Virginia.
Wow.
So I have a lot of experience. I've done a lot of different jobs inside the wastewater treatment industry, and I've also experienced a lot of different processes and equipment at the various places that I've worked.
Well, welcome aboard. That's the kind of, I think, expertise this plant needs.
Yes.
From our perspective. We'll talk about that in a little while. And I think does everybody know Jan Willem, who's with Ecotone? And it's the landscape planning company who's been around for a long time, and they're going to be talking, and his one of his fellow colleagues, Adrienne, will be joining us shortly, and they'll be talking about the Wetlands Master Plan. Well, nice crowd today. This is really exciting. It really is. Welcome aboard, everybody. We can just chat for a second. One of the things I'll jump ahead a little bit. Felicity and I talked yesterday, and she is actually kind of going back to school to do some stuff, and may not be able to commit the time necessary to be co-chair of the group. So the next collaborative meeting, we'll talk about organizational issues. It's just something that is kind of other matters, but we'll talk about that. I mean, I've been doing this now for 10 years. Andrew's joining us. How cool is that? Andrew just got a new job. I'll make him talk about that in a second. But anyway, so next meeting, hey, Andrew, how you doing? Next meeting, we'll talk about organizational issues within the collaborative. We've been going, it's actually 11 years now we've been going at this, but there is some absolute excitement, I think, currently in terms of both what Andy and the watershed's doing in terms of long-range planning for the watershed, but also what we're doing with the Pipeline Coalition and the ability to really make some significant impact on what's happening on the river. And I was telling people just a little while ago, one of the challenges has always been for us is connecting with the Pueblos. And just by pure coincidence, I know the new chairman of the All Pueblo Governors Council. And he and I are going to chat next week, but he's a really nice guy from Tesuque Pueblo, and I really like him. And I think we finally will be able to get them involved in a way that is essential in terms of our stakeholder planning for the future. And I guess we could go through this real quick. Adrienne, I don't think you know many of us. And so Adrienne's joined us. God, I've got so much to say. So Adrienne, you know Jan, I'm Carl, Collaborative. William is the president of the Agua Fria Village Association, and a whole bunch of other titles there. Fred is the new engineer manager for the wastewater treatment department of the city. Jennifer Lindline is a wonderful professor at Highland University. Maury is the invaluable assistant to Andy. Andy, you know, who is the watershed. Felicity is my co-chair. and former executive director of the Watershed Association. Bobby Beasold is just an absolute activist in terms of environment and important cultural issues. Andrew, you've got to tell me your official title, your new title.
Oh yeah, I'm the State Water Planning Program Manager. So
Woohoo!
Wow. Pretty impressive.
yeah, real fancy. So
And Kim, I don't know who you are. Karen Moore.
Hi, I'm a Highlands University student.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
joining from Dr. Lindline's class.
Oh, nice. And so is Mary Frances, and so is Chris Guladi, right?
Yes.
Mhm.
Welcome aboard. Tricia Snyder is the Wild Earth Guardians representative for the area. Brittany Montoya is the assistant to Rudy Garcia. Is that correct, Brittany?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
And then we got Kier Carrasco, who lives in the most beautiful little valley hidden away, El Cañon, along the Santa Fe River. So welcome aboard, Kier and Carol. So that's a real quick introduction of everybody. It's a great group. We have a fun time, and we do some really amazing things in my mind. So with that, I want to introduce Adrienne Rosenberg, who is the Monitoring and Educational Outreach Coordinator for Ecotone Landscape Planning, and she's going to discuss the Santa Fe County Wetlands Action Plan. Thank you, Adrienne.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I recognize a lot of people in here. Dr. Lindline's actually my professor too. We were talking yesterday, I believe it was, and I was like, oh, I need a contact for Upper Pecos Watershed. Would you be willing? And she's like, I'm going to be in the meeting tomorrow and I see you're on it. So it's a pleasure to have you all in here. And I'm getting to know some of you better. And of course, Jan Willems here. And I'm going to go ahead and pull up my presentation. Let's see. Can you actually enable me to share, please? Whoever's the host.
And Andy.
Yeah. That should do it.
Okay, it's going now.
Oh, good.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andy. So, my name is Adrienne Rosenberg, and this is the Santa Fe River Traditional Community Collaborative presentation of the Santa Fe County Wetlands Action Plan. And it's a project of Ecotone, and we are also working on behalf of NMED and the Santa Fe County. And this is a picture that's taken over near Chimayo at Los Pateros Wetlands. And I just think it's a really beautiful place. We did a little bit of monitoring out there one day. So I really like that photo. A little bit about me. Again, you did a good introduction there. I'm the Monitoring and Educational Outreach Coordinator. Here's my my email. I'll also have it on my last slide, so don't feel like you have to jot it down too quick, along with the excuse me, the website. And that's me out in the field catching bees. That's not with Jan Willem, but I just really like that picture as well. Okay. So an overview of Ecotone, because I have a feeling some of you are familiar with the company and some of you aren't. We're a complex ecological restoration planning and design company in northern New Mexico. And clients include nonprofits, educational institutes, landowners, local, state, and federal agencies. So for this, again, we're working with NMED in Santa Fe County. Our work centers on soil health, water storage, woodland and forest health, and creating, restoring habitat for wildlife. And I just pulled this direct from the website. We develop landscape management plans, conceptualize landscape conservation and restoration initiatives, bring people together, bring together project teams, identify, pursue funding sources, and direct the project's detailed design and implementation. So how familiar are folks in this meeting with the Wetland Action Plan and what a Wetland Action Plan is? If you can just unmute yourself and give me a sense.
Mhm.
Yes, it sounds like it. Okay, then I won't spend too much time. I'll just do a refresher for us. The Wetland Action Plan is what we're currently developing for the Santa Fe County. And of course, the Santa Fe River watershed lies within the county. And what a Wetland Action Plan does is it provides guidance for protection and restoration of wetlands. And it's community-based. It's voluntary actions to be taken by agencies, organizations, private landowners, all at their own discretion. And it usually has these few key components, which are, it's a document, so it has these components within the document. It's introducing the area, both the geological and natural and soil history, along with the cultural history and how those interplay. It describes the planning process and partners. It gives an inventory of the site. It talks about threats and impairments. So what are we looking at as far as threatening all the wetlands within Santa Fe County? And it proposes actions. And then the last piece, which I'm unsure, those who are more familiar with wetland plans and different projects can tell me, but within ours, there's a huge component of public outreach and education. So that's why I'm here today. The goals of our Wetland Action Plan is to ID the wetland areas themselves, describe the status in the ecological health of those wetlands, determine the need for restoration and protection, and address how to achieve this. So the Wetlands Action Plan was published back in 2012. I'm hoping I can send maybe Carl or Andy some documents just so you all have them after this meeting, and I can include the link for the Wetlands Action Plan. But it was at that time looking forward. And a lot of the actions were 2012, 2013, 2014 and beyond. It was this very like foresight. The foresight was pretty close into the future. So now 10 years later, we're looking backwards at this document and we're thinking about what have we accomplished in those actions, what need to be accomplished, what do the stakeholders, what do they feel is important, what's the tools that they have to bring, what are the actions that already been taken in these wetlands. And so right now we're at that revision phase and inviting more community input so we can really start to prioritize and suggest through this document what can be done and what's the best use of everyone's energy and resources. So that gets me to the point of the community outreach and input that we have done. Oh, here's a small a map. This is from Emil Sawyer with NMED and Jan Willem. They put this together. And of course, we're in E, the Santa Fe River watershed. That's what we're talking about since that's where you all are located. So the community input, we did this through a couple of surveys on Google Docs and also a little more informal within the email itself that we sent out to people initially introducing ourselves. And so some of you might have done these, others may have not. We had this meeting. We had an initial community stakeholder meeting, and that's where people went over this pretty substantial spreadsheet with me, which you can see on the right, and I'll get into just a little bit more. And we just really went through and tried to flesh out what I had gathered and we had gathered from the surveys. Also, we've gotten contributions from community members through conversations. Some people aren't as formal within a survey or meeting setting, so that's informed a lot of our data gathering, if you will, presentations like today. And finally, this priorities and solutions table that you can see to the right. So this table on the right, if you just read this upper grayed out column headers, we have watersheds and wetland areas. So you can see right here in blue, again, that's E, and that's the Santa Fe River watershed. And underneath is the actual wetlands that we've identified so far. Stakeholders are people that have either identified themselves as having concerns or priorities or projects ongoing within the wetlands now, or that we know have attachments to those wetlands. The urgency we got out through the survey, and that's a 1 through 5 scale, 1 being not very urgent, not urgent, to 5 very urgent. The reason for this urgency or not urgency, along with the current activities that are being done, the needs that need to be done for the particular wetland. So that can be function lost, what would you like to see restored, the strategies for the restoration and conservation of this wetland, as well as the capability for the future of in the 10 years to come. So on the right, you'll see this is, oops. This is on the right, the original document. Again, I will send that to you. So why is this important for the Santa Fe River Traditional Community Collaborative and Santa Fe County in general? Well, we consider you stakeholders. Each of you is either through the collaborative or through adjoining or separate organizations, really important to this process, and really folks that we want to invite at a certain point or after this meeting to give us some good feedback. Other people within this meeting have been really key within the core organizing team. Others of you have given your time and really written letters and talked to us beyond the meeting that we just had. So we really appreciate it because it helps us to form in our minds, what does the community want? What does it look like on the ground? And also a bit of a historical and ecological perspective that maybe we don't have, given maybe we don't live within the wetland area. Also, there's connections that can be made between different organizations that are working within a wetland. So for instance, NMED has a couple of projects that are ongoing, or Albuquerque Wildlife Federation. So sometimes organizations can find that there's already existing projects that they'd like to work on with the other stakeholders who are currently working there. Impacts, what we put into this document will impact people within that wetland. Not that we're going to initiate any of these projects. That's up to organizations to come forward and say, this is a project we'd like to take on. It's been laid out in this document. We feel like this is enough evidence for us to go forward. So it impacts what could happen. And you can also impact what's also in the document. I consider that knowledge holders come from a variety of areas. I'm in school right now, and I'm getting a lot of book knowledge, but what I really find is the knowledge that really is informative to me on both an intellectual level and maybe more of an emotional, spiritual level, is when I'm outside and I'm observing and I'm making the connection points between my home space, which is in Embudo, New Mexico, and what I'm learning in school. So I think it's really important to underline and really uphold the people within our communities like yourselves who have knowledge of the wetlands that we're talking about. And finally, this is Santa Fe Watershed, which is within your watershed. So I pulled out from that very boring table and tried to make it a little more sparkly. The particular section that was on the Santa Fe watershed that included the different wetlands. And so I'm going to go through, if you think of each of these next slides as the columns themselves, and I tried to pull out the information so we can digest it a little better. then you can follow along with that. So again, this is the priorities and solutions table for the Santa Fe River watershed within the Santa Fe County document spreadsheet that I had. So some of the stakeholders, and I'll just touch on a few, are Santa Fe Watershed Association, and a few of you folks are in there today, and thank you for all your work. New Mexico Acequia Association, NMED again, we have La Cienega Community, we have the State Land Office, Randall Davy Ottoman Center, the City of Santa Fe, and so on. So I think it's really important to see that this is stakeholders, we're talking about agencies, we're talking about private landowners, we're talking about pueblos, organizations, coalitions, collaboratives. We're talking about, I think I got it all, but those are the different components of this, what we're hoping is a really robust wetlands action plan. So these are the areas, the wetlands that we have identified so far. And we have the Santa Fe River in general. So that's when people just gave us kind of general feedback about the whole watershed itself, the 2 Mile Reservoir, the Santa Fe River below the wastewater treatment plant, the Cieneguilla, Arroyo Hondo, Rio Hondo downstream from I-25, Cienega Creek area, Alamo and Bonanza Creek, Municipal Watershed, Randall Davy Ottoman Society Center and Sanctuary, the Buckman Diversion, and then the Lower River Watershed. The priorities and solutions, this was interesting because I hadn't really fleshed out since our meeting where things are falling, because you have these numbers that are put in, and then to actually group it together, it was kind of interesting to see this. So again, is that 1 to 5 scale, 1 being somewhat urgent, 5 being very urgent. 1 to 2 is the 2 Mile Reservoir. And what I had seen is that the response that was giving that it's acceptable condition and depends on the allocation of the city of Santa Fe. Arroyo Hondo was at a 3 due to overutilization of the area. And then these 4 wetlands were interesting. Again, it's the Santa Fe watershed in general, and that's because many stakeholders and hydrological changes, needs and goals are not aligning. Below the wastewater treatment plant is the sedimentation in the pipeline, which is a hot subject right now. Cieneguilla, the sedimentation and the beaver management, invasive removal, overdevelopment, and Rio Hondo below or downstream I-25 is the ongoing development. So you can see that there's a menagerie of concerns, and also how people are rating the urgency. And again, not every wetlands had a rating. This was a meeting that we couldn't nitpick every single one, and we're hoping to fill in the blanks later, but this is the feedback we got for the Santa Fe River watershed. So the current activities people are doing, I won't read all of these either, but just to highlight a few, there was talk about rain garden programs, the trail and access limitation, water for the pond. So that's, if you see how I denoted this, it says TNC, so the Nature Conservancy at 2 Mile Reservoir. So the first one is who's doing it and where is that at after the at. Monitoring changes in the water. That's the Bureau of Geology and Mineral Resources at La Cienega. Restoration structures and vegetation planning. Keystone restoration at Rio and Medio after the fire. That's Albuquerque Wildlife Federation at Municipal Wetlands. And I see there's something in the chat. Oh, I can do that for sure. So I've been reminded, please use La Cienega and La Cieneguilla. So I will certainly do that. Thank you for telling me. All right, here's the needs and concerns. So that was the next column. In general, there's a concern of reconnectivity of wetland away from the urban area, more rain gardens and other best management practices. I'm not sure about this one. This is something we got through the survey, but the NPS priority streams. There's a concern of short on water, as you can see with the Santa Fe River with no functional riparian outside the Santa Fe Canyon Preserve. At the 2 Mile Reservoir, there's concerns of buffer zones, waterline protection, and allocation for the pond. At WWTP, again, the pipeline is a concern in protecting those wetlands. Below the WWTP, again, farmers concerned with contamination. I remember Mr. Me brought that one up. Thank you very much during our last meeting. At the Cienega Creek area, understand, assess, and curb future of 1,000-year flood damage. And then at the municipal wetlands, and this was kind of an overall comment, and I think I remember Maria was the one that brought this up from the county, is just really talking to folks and getting the education about wetlands and why they're important and how we can protect them and help them flourish, along with assessing and protecting them outside of this education. And in particular, this one was talking about the river corridor. Municipal wetlands, and this got a little bit of discussion after it, the river being too straight in town. So with the Audubon Society, their high priorities, of course, are the wetlands within their umbrella. And then the past work at the upper and middle wetlands are priority at the lower river watershed. So the strategies and capabilities for the future. This one, I think in some ways these things are still being worked out within people, within their mind, and also within the organizations. So for instance, Santa Fe, NMED, Surface Water Quality Bureau, they were able to offer at certain wetlands assistance with funding to support restoration. So I'll just go through these very quickly, but generally with the wetlands in Santa Fe County, or excuse me, the Santa Fe River watershed, there needs to be sort of a vision and a way to execute that vision with all the different people that are on the reaches of the river who have concerns over those reaches. With 2 Mile Reservoir, public education, science fencing, again, that was mentioned in the last slide, with fears about the buffer and the pond. Santa Fe River below the treatment plant, restoration projects, work with biohabitats and treatment plant for riparian plants after that filter. And so NMED had made the first suggestion, and they're also, again, willing to assist with funding to support the restoration. At La Cieneguilla, restoration projects and removing invasives and installing flow devices in dams, and assisting with funding to support restoration. That is a capability NMED is able to do, and looking for assistance is what Santa Fe County Open Space gave as their capabilities. And Arroyo Hondo, again, restoration. So we can see, and I just want to point out again, there were several wetlands within this watershed, and not every box was checked or filled out. So this is so far what we've gathered. And what I'm seeing is that there are a lot of arms to what people think are the best strategies and capabilities, and some organizations who are able to provide in some of those areas and others in other areas. So what can you do to contribute? well, we have this survey that I've left open that helps us fill in those blanks. And you can take that on behalf of the Santa Fe River Traditional Community Collaborative if you feel like it represents. And I'm not sure how your organization works with consensus and coming up with how you go forward with organizations like ours. But maybe someone takes the survey in lieu of the whole team. Or you have an organization that you're connected with outside of this meeting that you could potentially feel like be interested. I've had from this group alone tons of people that you've wanted me to include, and that's been fantastic. I see my internet's a little unstable, so if anyone missed anything, please tell me. You can share your experience and knowledge if you feel like that is appropriate for you to do. Again, I'm always learning. This is, I feel like, a learning document. I know Jan Willem is very much a student. And so we welcome and invite that if that's something you want to share. Or you can contribute at the next stakeholder meeting, and you will be included on the email list, or we'll pass it off to folks within this group that can distribute out that meeting date and time. So that brings me to the final thank you. Thank you to everyone for listening and for watching the slides. Thank you for Jan Willem. It's been such a pleasure to work with him, and there's some core team members on this call, so thank you all for your contributions. And as my 7th grade algebra teacher in Catholic school used to say, questions, comments, collusions, confusions, and confessions. So if anyone wants to contribute, you're most welcome to, and at the bottom, of course, is my email. So thank you all.
Thank you, Adrienne. That's really impressive and something that is really important to the watershed for sure. Just wondering if any of the collaborative members have any questions for Adrienne?
I do.
Bobby?
I didn't see anywhere in there that an inclusion with runoff and those issues of water coming in from down the streets and, you know, off of buildings and things like that. And, you know, how to, some recommendations to the county and definitely the city of Santa Fe on how to channel that and so that it's the water is useful. Is the survey, this is 2 parts,
Sure.
Is the survey the thing that came through from Utah? Is that the survey?
No, it's not. It's
Different, okay.
It's a very to my best of my abilities, a simple Google survey. And if that's something that interests you, Bobby, I can certainly send it your way. But thank you for bringing that up about the runoff and how we have to think about that and the toxins that come from that, the overwhelming of the wetlands, perhaps if they're not at a healthy state. I didn't bring up, because my time was limited, we had a more general, because people are giving us all sorts of feedback, not just particular to areas, but more general. And it was mentioned erosion, but what you're saying is another element that I'd like to include in that. So thank you. And you've also been emailing us with other questions and suggestions. So I really appreciate that. Seeing your name pop up in the email box and seeing your face now. So thank you for your contributions.
Adrienne, can you stop the screen share so we can all see each other?
Yeah, you shouldn't.
Cool.
Okay. So any other questions, folks?
I see William and Jan Willem.
Yeah, I just wanted to build on what Bobby's saying, excuse me, because we had that July 22nd, 2018 1,000-year flood, and you know, climate change is saying, oh, you're going to have more frequent flooding and more severe flooding. You know, even though you might get less water, you might get all your water in 1 year in one horrific storm. And, I could see that selling wetlands to both city and county as a way to mitigate the damage that's being done. And in our last Traditional Communities Collaborative meeting, I went on a rant about all of the things reported to FEMA and how basically the city and county have done nothing since that time to really address it. Like, if you just ignore it, it's just going to go away, and no, I think, we need to look at wetlands as a strategy to dissipate some of this water that's flooding us.
I'm going to take a moment and introduce some people that have joined us. Darren Munzberg, who is from Alavahada and is the man of many talents there. Jay Christie and Kelsey Kohler, who are the new residents of La Cieneguilla, a beautiful piece of property they bought from Ed Siri. Patricio Pacheco, who's with the city of Santa Fe, who I always appreciate being part of the group. And I think that's everybody, but yeah. So there are a couple of questions I have in terms of this. La Cienega has the second largest wetlands in New Mexico. And it goes beyond the creek. I mean, each of the acequias in La Cienega depend, and there's 3 of them, depend on spring flows. And so restoration of wetlands is really important to us. And those of you, many of you, you've heard this from me many times, is the problem we've had over the last 40 years is proliferation of residential wells. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 wells that have gone into the upper La Cienega area. That's my estimate. And so there are things that we are now looking at in terms of working to restore those springs. And I'm not sure if you're aware, Adrienne, of the Pipeline Coalition. This is a new group that got formed as a result of the return flow pipeline project, city-county project. And we are really at an important moment because we will be, in the next month or so, we'll be working on the RFP to hire a facilitator to facilitate a stakeholder-involved planning process on what happens when the flow of water in the river is reduced by 50%. But what's interesting in this whole equation is the recognition of the importance of the springs in La Cienega and how they are important in terms of the flow of the water in the river. And so I had a chat with John Dupuis, the utility director, last Friday about the need to bring infrastructure into Upper La Cienega to get people off wells. And so that's a project now. I'm kind of jumping ahead. This we'll be discussing this a little bit later on, but that is a ongoing project. And there's a series of about 5 or 6 different things that can be done that would impact the springs in La Cienega. And that includes taking the 4 wells in El Dorado, in the El Dorado district, El Dorado area, sanitation and water and sanitation district, they have 4 wells in the Ancha Tasuki formation. If we can get them off, those wells affect the springs of La Cienega. And so we're hopeful when the county puts in the Canyoncito water line that they'll be able to take those wells offline. Another discussion we've had with John Dupuis is the water from the Quill Pen wastewater treatment plant, the one that the county acquired from the Penn, and using that water to recharge the aquifer. So there are a series of things that we can do to try and mitigate, and my hope is to restore the springs. But the big one is bringing infrastructure, bringing water into Upper La Cienega. So I'm putting together a formal letter to express those concerns and to share it with the people who can actually fund it. And so I just wanted to add that as part of the wetlands consideration. I mean, again, I think that people recognize in general the importance of restoring these wetlands. And I certainly there's some political pushback at times in terms of we need the water for our residential uses kind of thing. But I think there's a shift in that. And I really hope that both the city and county are starting to recognize how valuable wetlands are to this area. So I'm rambling, I'm ranting a little bit like William does sometimes. So any other questions about wetlands in Santa Fe County? But Adrienne, this is great stuff. Highlands has produced another excellent student. So thank you for their program there. So any other questions?
Jan has his hand up.
Okay, please. Sorry. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And thank you all for your interest in this topic. I wanted to clarify a couple things about the Wetlands Action Plan status. It is really an initiative of the EPA as part of wetlands restoration projects. And it is funded through the EPA or by the EPA through the State Environment Department. And we got a grant from the Surface Water Quality Bureau with that EPA funding to do this. And this is attached to a wetlands restoration project in Chimayo for the Los Potreros wetlands, one of those other very important wetlands in the northern part of Santa Fe County. So that said, I would like to clarify also that the wetlands action plans on the side of EPA and the Surface Water Quality Bureau have an important function as basically a clarification for them that due diligence has been done in terms of studying the priorities and getting community input for the prioritization of which wetlands need work and protection, and have somewhat of a first good balanced voice from the community as to when proponents step forward, like nonprofits, the county, or consulting firms that want to take on a wetlands restoration project, so that they can actually be guided by this document. The document is really a guide. It's not any form of requirement. It's really a community-based guidance document that helps the EPA and the state understand what the interests are for wetland restoration and how the community can work together, because they have already identified through the Wetland Action Plan what the issues are. And so that's really how the Wetlands Action Plan works. And the state basically hands that to us, really all of us here, to take that on. And any proponent or coalition can step forward and use that document to get funding. It is basically for the state and the EPA a tool to allocate funds. So it is really important to have a wetlands action plan, because if you don't have that, you have a much lower status to get any funding through the EPA or even the Bureau of Reclamation or other federal and state funding sources to really address wetland restoration. So I wanted to make that really clear what the status is and what it really does at a formal level. Then to address issues of runoff and flood management, they were clearly present 10, 12 years ago. So they have been identified even at that time and very, I think, well described in the 2012 document. And we're definitely going to keep that in. And with the contributions and reinforcements of statements that you have made and others, it is clearly an important issue that needs to be addressed. The issue of wells was addressed 10 years ago as well, but needs to be really talked about. The issue of the pipeline is, of course, new. And so that will now get a place probably as one of those potential challenges to wetland restoration and the health and ecology of wetlands and infiltration downstream from the wastewater treatment plant. So just wanted to make that clear as to where we're at and what we've heard so far. Thanks.
Thank you. Darren?
Thanks. And thank you, Adrienne and Jan Willem. And I just wanted to amplify on that. I'm seeing a big opportunity here to revisit, and I know Jan Willem's aware of it because I saw it in some of the our correspondence, right? Back to the Bureau of Reclamation study and the ordered feasibility alternatives. So now that here's still an organically developing wetlands action plan, this may be the opportunity, especially since it's coming from the same sort of lineage out of EPA and the same body of concern and the same policy that we know is driving NEPA as it relates to, like you say, the newly arisen, what's not what we were calling in the other context legacy problems in the watershed or in the wetlands, we're looking at now, right, with a new challenge. So we get to look at it from that new perspective, but it does bring in the Bureau of Reclamation's feasibility studies on the reuse. And so I think maybe this is a really good opportunity for us to put the input into this wetlands action plan that heightens the possibility of using those other alternatives, which we've, I think, discussed over for sure over the last year or so, are more appealing to us, right? In our various communities of stakeholders. So maybe this is a really good opportunity to re-express that and sort of re-rank the reuse priorities out of that. The other thing, and now I remember specifically what you had mentioned, Jan Willem, was the way that the areas of the lower Santa Fe River were identified as separate by I think city water planning and water resource management. And I think we've looked at that for a long time and said, yeah, because there are specifically, different treatment requirements in very distinct reaches of the river. So because they each have a little bit different problem as you go down, and there's a little bit change of use or some minor, something that requires attention to it. But I think it's a great opportunity, and I don't think that really it's going to get lost. It's neat to hear that the old information and observations and inputs from a decade ago are still there, because the problems haven't changed or the observations haven't gone away. So it's nice that we're not reinventing wheels or studying the study, but adding on to it. So now I think what we get to do is look back at that feasibility ranking from Reclamation and maybe shift those parts of the puzzle around and see how we tie that into acquisition of infrastructure or leaning on the federal delegation to do that or what have you. So EPA being involved, a particularly good resource for that. So thank you guys for this presentation and the education this morning.
Any other questions? I want to point out something that Andrew did with the city, and that is a graphic that showed the growth of wells in Santa Fe, in the city of Santa Fe. It's absolutely astounding. We now have over 12,000 wells in Santa Fe County, 47 water systems. But to watch how this thing has grown, and it's just for the city is what Andrew did. And so I would like to see that done for the entire county, because it's mind-boggling to see. And obviously in La Cienega, because I have what we call the lot split subdivision, where you add 400 homes that avoid any of the subdivision requirements because they're done via lot splits, and each home puts in a well, and each home thinks they've got abundant water. And there's a regulation that the county is supposed to enforce about meters on the wells that has never happened. And so you have people with little farms, equestrian centers, and just think that there's unlimited water, which leads me to another quick discussion about something that the Santa Fe County Water Policy Advisory Committee is doing. We're working on reaching out to well owners in the Santa Fe area, Santa Fe County, to talk about how they can participate in conservation efforts. And it really becomes an educational component in this outreach, in getting them to understand the limitations of their water. And the and it's really, we have so many, as I think Darren mentioned, we have so many kind of unique geohydrological features throughout the county that the water situation from Madrid to Cerritos is different from, it's all different. And I think it's important that we start to educate people and well owners and people in those areas about the limitations of water. So that's something that the Water Policy Advisory Committee is actually going to be working with the city too to do that with well owners within the city as well. So I rambled again. Anyway, so Adrienne, thank you so much. Any other questions?
Yes.
Okay, Maury, you're first.
I just had a quick question about what the timeline is for your grant and what your timeline is for writing up this updated wetlands action plan.
Yeah, and Jan Willem can certainly jump in. I believe 2023 is when the grant ends, and then we should have it written up within the end of in 2023 itself. I'm not sure exactly when. Jan Willem, do you remember the particular? I have to go back and look at our timeline.
Yeah, we're planning to have a draft in the fall and get it through a feedback process this fall so that we can get it into the Surface Water Quality Bureau early 2023 and get final approvals and sign off, and then do the final edits well before the end of the grant, which is June 2023. So pretty much within the next year, it needs to be completed.
Bobby?
Adrienne, I wondered to get if I could get a copy of the map that you showed us of the wetlands. I would like that, and then with Carl in your statement about education, and that and many of you have heard me say this lots of times over the years, but that the more we have images that show where the water comes from, like you said, like Madrid is Madrid to La Cienega is a whole different thing, and where the water comes from, how did it used to flow, where are the springs, marking those springs. There's a project that I want to work on physically marking them, but if we also have maps that show where the springs were, where they are now, would be enormously helpful. And then there's one other piece of this, which is that what William touched on, which I share, is a great frustration with the bureaucracy, and how I would love to trust that this process is really going to give the county and the city and NEMD a kick in the butt to really do something positive about our water. And but I'm pretty jaded because I've seen a lot of, like Andrew is aware, and Andrew's still on here. Yeah, you are. But me trying to get a curb cut in a very simple place by one of the post offices to get the water runoff to go to the trees rather than down the road, and it's not possible. It's not totally impossible, but it feels impossible, and that's I would love to know. This will help. Thank you, Jan.
Carl, may I respond to this?
Sure.
So to clarify again, while the Wetlands Action Plan can, because it will be read hopefully by agency folks who are more looking at policy and standards and those kind of things, it is really a plan for us and for, say, that those who are interested in taking initiatives in wetland protection and restoration. Typically, many agencies, EPA, Bureau of Reclamation and all that, they are operating at a regulatory and a funding level. And and New Mexico has very few authorities to really impose sanctions or make sure that things don't go overboard. And typically New Mexico is in a situation that you almost have to step up to the plate as people who feel that they're offended by certain things and say that, or even file a lawsuit to get certain things done and to remind the agencies that they have a regulatory responsibility. Not that I want to advocate any of that, but that's pretty much the reality of things. And so this Wetlands Action Plan is for us. The state will push it back if we ask the state to implement it. They're not going to do that. And so that is really important for us to understand. So what the Wetland Action Plan will do is identify what the current problems are with water loss and physical destruction or impairment of wetlands. And we're trying to document that as clearly as we can, but also concise, because we cannot have a 1,000-page document. And so then identify solutions in the realm of education and outreach. A lot of data collection is still needed. The issue of maps, for instance, that you brought up, has been an issue for years. And we're now trying to get some basic maps done in collaboration with the New Mexico Environment Department, but that is a major challenge because the data are just not equally available or the inventories have never really been done. And then identify priorities for restoration and protection projects, identify associated best practices to implement those projects, and link to state and federal policies and standards. Look, of course, at the long-term water planning and see what tools and instruments are in there so that actually proponents can step forward and with that information formulate effective small wetland restoration projects, or maybe larger ones, but typically the funding is in the order of a couple of $100,000. And the scale of things in Santa Fe County is too small to really start looking at $1 million projects. But anyway, that is kind of the scope of what the Wetlands Action Plan can do for us.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions? Again, Adrienne, thank you so much. We look forward to continuing. We'd like to, you're permanently invited to these meetings. And so we hope that you will join us again. Yeah, Felicity?
Darren, did you have a chance to talk?
Oh, got another one.
Yeah, I just had one. I'm intrigued by the idea of the scaling, right? Where it makes it worth the, say, state or county's while, or Fed's while, say, because of the impact of maybe the size of our demographic or the lack of that strength, right? Is that, am I reading that right? That so, because what strikes me is that we're in a unique situation where the wetlands here are integrally related to the functioning of our wastewater reclamation plant and what we do with reuse alternatives for that. And this may be the point where we are starting to talk about, excuse me, multi-million dollars worth of infrastructure rehabilitation or replacement to make some of these other alternatives in terms of aquifer recharge or treatment of the water through biologic actors possible. So I'm just wondering if that helps, or is it simply going to be a census-driven equation where it's not enough people to spend that much money federally? Or not sure. So that's kind of the question. I know it's open-ended. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, something to talk about for sure. Any other questions? Jay Christie and Kelsey have come up with a really good idea, but especially for people who are new to our group, because we have been at this for a while and we tend to assume people know all that we know, and it's not the case. And so I would like to start identifying questions or ways that we can clarify what we're doing. We obviously have a wealth of talent and information to share. So let's make that as something we can start talking about for sure. But I also want to recognize Maria Lohman, who is with the County of Santa Fe and she was instrumental in getting Adrienne and the folks from Ecotone to join us today. So I just wanted to say hi. Welcome
everybody.
Aboard. And I know Andrew's going to have to leave shortly, but I dearly appreciate you being here. It's so important to have your view and perspective and ideas. And so good luck in the new job. We look forward to better water planning than we've ever had before in the state of New Mexico. So thank you. All right, so with that, I want to introduce Fred Heerbrandt. And I appreciate your patience for sticking with us for this while, and I hope you've enjoyed the conversation. But Fred, as I said before, is the new wastewater engineer manager, city wastewater management division. And he's going to talk about the Paseo Real wastewater reclamation. And it's now called the Paseo Real wastewater reclamation facility, and talk about their discharge permit renewal application, which I would guess you've had a little bit of experience with in your many years of working in wastewater. So with that, welcome aboard. Thank you very much, Fred. Look forward to your presentation.
Thank you. This permit is actually a little different because it's application of treated wastewater to the soil as opposed to discharging it to surface water. So this permit is issued by the Groundwater Quality Bureau of the New Mexico Environmental Department, and it covers the use of our effluent for uses other than discharge to the Santa Fe River. So we have in city uses that we use this water for. It's used for dust control at construction sites. It's used for watering animals, both wildlife and domesticated animals. And it's used for wash down here at the treatment plant. We have a distribution system here at the treatment plant where we use this water to wash down so we don't have to use potable water to do those things. So the first permit was issued to the city in 1984. So we've held this permit for a long time. And each user of our wastewater has their own individual permit because most of these users do the application of the wastewater to the ground or through spray irrigation or irrigation channels. And we just provide them with the water that's treated to a certain standard. The standard that we treat to is considered class 1B recycled water. So it has to meet certain water quality standards that are determined by the state for our use of that water. And the different classes of treatment determine how you can use that water. So the 1B is primarily used for irrigation of non-crop foods, irrigation of ornamentals, grassland and stuff like that.
Fred, somebody's asked if you can share do a share screen with that, or is that possible with the document? Or
I did not prepare a PowerPoint or
all right,
anything.
no problem.
If anybody's interested, I can make available our past permit to you folks that you could share between you if you wanted to look at what those specific treatment requirements are. Primarily, it deals with nitrogen, total suspended solids, BOD, and fecal coliform. I don't know if you're familiar with those particular contaminants. Fecal coliform is basically an indicator of bacteria that could cause disease. And that's what we use. We test for an indicator for a common bacteria that's associated with the digestive system. So that the thought is if that's present in high numbers, there could be disease-causing organisms associated with them.
I think that Patricia has a question. Patricia, do you have your hand up? Guess not.
I'm sorry. No, I do not.
Okay, go ahead, Fred. Sorry about that.
Okay. BOD is a measure of organic material in water. It measures the oxygen utilization of bacteria in the water. So it's measuring the respiration rate of the bugs, which increase as organic material increases in the sample that you're testing. Total suspended solids are solids that can be filtered out of the water. That's different than dissolved solids. So those are primarily the contaminants that are looked at as far as this reuse water. Now, there's other contamination requirements that we have to treat for, because when we're treating the water, we don't know whether it's going to end up in a river or if it's going to end up as a reuse water. So we treat it all to the same levels. And so it has to meet our NPDES permit, which is for the discharge to the stream, as well as this additional permit, which is for use on the soil. So it's probably treated to a higher level than the minimum requirements for application to the soil, because the soil actually adds another level of treatment before it would ever reach any groundwater, if that would occur. You also have issues when you're using spray irrigation of evaporation, transpiration through the plants. So I've heard estimates where as little as 30 to 40% of the wastewater that you would apply by spray actually contacts the soil, because it ends up on the plants and evaporates before it ever gets to that point, or it can be directly absorbed through the tissues of the plants. So that's in a nutshell is why we have to get the permit, because we are reusing the water. We changed the name of our facility to emphasize the fact that we are reusing that water, we are reclaiming it, as opposed to discharging it as a waste. So we see this as a resource, and we're trying to maximize our use of this resource in any way we can. And to do that, we have to have this permit. So the reason why all of the notices went out, and we sent out some 2,700 notices to property owners, is because the permit was modified in this 5-year cycle, which we have to renew this permit every 5 years. When we renewed the permit, we changed the name of the facility, as was noted earlier. We added one user. So this is just a person we provide water to, they apply it. And that was to the club is at Las Campanas. And they have a private golf course that they apply it to. They also have their own wastewater treatment facility, which produces reuse water, which they use. So we're more or less a backup source for them in case the treatment of their water doesn't meet the minimum requirements to apply it to the golf course. They can utilize our water, and they don't have to worry about their greens going brown while they're waiting for their treatment to improve. So that also triggered a modification. We changed the total amount of water that we could apply that's listed in the permit from 13 million gallons a day to 10 million gallons a day. And this number is based on the permitted capacity of the treatment facility. So 13 million gallons a day is the maximum amount of flow that we're permitted to receive, treat, and discharge. So that's why that number was in there. We decided we removed or reduced that number to 10 million gallons a day because based on our existing flows and our projected flows, we don't see the facility reaching that level of flow within the next 5-year permit period. So the 13 number we assumed was not accurate. It wasn't realistic. So we reduced it to 10. And additionally, we started to use an existing tank that we have at the treatment facility to store recycled water. It's a 2 million gallon tank. It's been here since, I believe, the early 80s, but it hadn't been used to store this reuse water before. So we started to use that, and it gives us more flexibility in the distribution of the water because we have that 2 million gallons of water ready to go if somebody needs more water than we happen to be producing on that day. So those 4 items are what triggered the mandatory notification. The notification actually comes directly from the state. They tell us who we have to notify and what type of notification we have to send to them. So that the notice that went out was actually produced by the state. And we simply took it and stuffed the envelopes and mailed them out to the people that were on our list of notifications. And the list consisted of anyone who lives within 1/3 of a mile of a property line of a property that uses our recycled water. So that's how we ended up with 2,700 people that we had to notify. Our current permit, actually, I believe it expired in April of 21. We submitted our renewal application in October of 2020. So while they're going through the review process, our permit is administratively extended as long as it's being reviewed and we're being responsive, which we are. The process, this recycle period has been extended because of issues with COVID, staffing issues here at the city, as well as issues at the state with staffing. So it's taken a little longer to get our new permit. We have completed all our notification requirements, so we're hopeful that we'll receive our draft permit here within the next couple of weeks. Does anybody have any questions? It's a lot of information to take in.
Sorry about that. Mr. Heerbrandt, did I hear you say that the club has renewed an application for use?
I can't tell you. They have their own application.
Okay.
For their own permit. So I don't know how their cycle runs. I assume they've renewed it because they wouldn't be able to apply any recycled wastewater unless they held a permit. So I can't speak to whether it was renewed or when it was renewed, but if they're using recycled water, they would have to hold this permit.
Right.
But they have
Thanks.
their own. It's not related to ours other than the fact that we list them as a user of our water.
But did I understand you to say then that they had been off of the list of users for a while and now they're back on, or?
They are. We had an agreement, a legal agreement with them, which was executed, I believe, back in 2001, which gave them an option to utilize our water. But as I said, they have their own wastewater treatment facility that produces their own recycled water that they use on their golf course, and that they have now added themselves to our permit to use our water in case their water isn't adequate for surface application.
Thanks.
If I could, so Fred, you were saying that the change is that the water is not being, from the wastewater treatment plant, is not being discharged into the river anymore. It's now being discharged to the soil. And wouldn't that affect the EPA standards that call for a freshwater fishery standards to be met?
We're still discharging to the river.
Okay.
How much goes where depends on the demand on that particular day. It changes day to day. We don't determine the demand that the folks that use our recycled water, what they need when. We don't determine that. They actually have their own pumping stations here at the treatment plant, and they can pump water when they need it from us. So depending on what their activities are, how much water goes to the river and how much water ends up used in irrigation varies. Like the golf courses use a lot more water during the summer than they use during the winter. So generally water uses are greater during the summer. So right now the bulk of our discharge goes to the Santa Fe River, but that would decrease as reuse increases. But we don't control it. We have a maximum amount that we can provide to these users, but we don't determine when they use it or how much they use on a particular day. We're a supplier.
Yeah. I'm just trying to kind of figure out, I mean, I get it with Las Campanas and Marty Sanchez, for instance, which is the city itself too.
Yes.
So,
and the ball fields at the rec center, I mean.
Yeah, all the city functions there. But so if they didn't have the demand for the water for reuse, then the wastewater treatment plant could put it in the soil or in the river, wherever they wanted.
Not wherever we wanted, no.
Oh,
We can only use the reuse water where it's listed in our permit. So we couldn't decide to suddenly water a field next to the airport because it's not covered in our permit. We could request that and modify our permit if that's what we wanted to do, but it would have to be approved by the state. If it doesn't go to one of our approved users that are in our permit, it has to go to the Santa Fe River.
okay.
And like I said, what we discharge to Santa Fe River is covered under our NPDES permit, which is issued by EPA.
Right. Yeah, and that's the freshwater fishery is mentioned and a bunch of others too, like human consumption. So, yeah.
Right.
Fred, this is really interesting, and I think it's interesting in that you're new to this, and you're walking into a whole lot of cultural issues, environmental issues, things that we have been concerned about for a long time. Now, one of the things we do is look at that plant that was, I believe, originally constructed in the 1960s. And we have had over the last number of years certain problems with the discharge. Things that have gotten into the river that aren't supposed to get into the river. And I don't know if you've been educated on those issues, but that's an ongoing concern for farmers and ranchers and people who, and the community of La Bajada, who are below the wastewater treatment plant. So I don't want to do it, what I'd love to do is to get you to see some of the areas, and this we'll talk about this in a little while about a tour, but to understand what the significance of that river is to the communities below it, and places like El Cañon, which is this little two house community, or the ranchers or farmers who have depended on that water for hundreds of years, and the pueblos who have depended on that water for thousands of years. And so it's an ongoing contentious issue to some degree, and I'm not going to put you on the spot at all. I think it's really important that we have a new perspective, a new person looking at this plant to see if it makes sense. I mean, our ongoing concern is that poorly constructed wetlands right below the wastewater treatment plant that we have had city staff describe as a nutrient sump. So no matter how clean we get that water coming out of the plant, by the time it goes through that wetland, it's dirty again. And so that's one of those things we're looking at from a community perspective that's important to us, is we figure out ways to deal with that wetlands that has been so poor. It has not been managed. It was supposed to be managed when it was first construction, never has been. And again, I don't want to put you on the spot. You're not the person that's responsible for this, but I think it's important that you understand some of our concerns as well. So when we talk about ground contamination, that's a real concern for us along that wetland, because there are people that have wells within a half-mile radius of the river. And those are the kind of things that we would be concerned about, because it's been sustained over time. And it would be interesting to go back and see how many times the discharge was not appropriate, or they had somehow violated. And one of the simple things we've asked to get done, and never quite happens, is some way of letting people downstream know when there's a problem at the plant, some sort of notification to get their animals out of the water, or not water that day or use that water that day. Those kinds of things are just important, but we can't get through the bureaucracy of the city to get them to understand that I mean, there are ways that we have easy ways to reach out to people within our community, but we have to know what's going on at the plant. So that's kind of an issue. Now, when you talk about, the golf courses are always a sore point with us because especially like the Santa Fe Golf Course Country Club that doesn't pay anything for water, has an enduring contract that goes on forever. And it's one of the things we're looking at, these farms, drying up, not able to water their fields. I mean, there's the largest organic farm in Santa Fe County is at Tres Rios Ranch. It's 24 acres. And I know Alonso Gallegos is the foreman of that ranch. And there was a series about 5 or 6 years he couldn't water. He couldn't plant because there was no water in the river. And that was because of the beavers. Now the beavers came as a result of the wetlands that were poorly installed. And so there's a whole host of issues that maybe you haven't been aware of, but will help you be aware of over time. And again, you're the engineer, you're not the person who's going to fix the wetlands. But it's just something I think in general, it's important for you to understand where we're coming from and our intention of really trying to improve the quality of water in that river.
I do have some knowledge of wetlands. Back in a prior career, I was actually a wetland delineator. So I know quite a bit. My undergrad degree is in biology with my concentration in ecology. So I know a little bit. And I've dealt with wetland issues as part of development projects when I was working with municipal engineering. So
that's great.
Like I said, I've done a lot of different things in my career.
I like to have that kind of knowledge in someone in your position. That's really going to be helpful, I think, in the long run. Yeah, this is pretty interesting stuff. So any other questions from folks?
I do.
Bobby?
Let me unmute.
You just unmuted yourself. You muted yourself.
I'm so confused by these things. So, okay, by that. So, Fred, how is the wastewater treatment plant going to be upgraded to prevent E. coli being released into the river, which happened numerous times? You pointed out that that's one of the things you track for. The girls' school who have been monitoring things in the river quality. They have a little section of land below the wastewater treatment plant near Ed Series' place. Found that the levels of phosphates were incredibly high. And you didn't mention that in your analysis. I believe it was phosphates, right? So, these are all issues, that, and the soil can, as you said, filter some things, but plants are also uptaking some of these pollutants, and so that are still going through into the river. And the other piece of that you also are aware of, I'm sure, are pharmaceuticals. We've all discussed this before in previous meetings, that those are also released into the river. And so how is the plant going to be upgraded to deal with various things like phosphates and E. coli, which are simple ones? The pharmaceuticals, I'm aware there's no federal regulation on pharmaceuticals. However, those are things that are going into the water, including caffeine and other items. So talk to me.
Our long-term goal here is to treat our water as a resource. And the long-term treatment goal at the plant is to treat to potable standards. That's where we want to be. That's where we're heading. It'll take time and a lot of money to get there, but that's our goal, because we see that the water that we treat, we can't just send it away. We have to use it, and we have to use it as a good steward, because there's a lot, as you've discussed, there's a lot of different competing interests for the water, both agricultural, commercial, and environmental. So that's where we want to go. We want to be able to treat it to a potable standard so that we can use it anywhere. And we're moving in that direction now. We're working on a project right now to improve the headworks of the treatment plant. And the next project we have planned after that would be an improvement of our filtration and disinfection facilities. Those are both areas where we've targeted a need for improvements, and that's what we're working on right now. But as I said, what we'd like to do is treat it to potable standards. So,
real quick, I have a question, but first I want to make sure people understand it's no longer Ed Series Ranch. It's Kelsey Kolar and Jay Christie's place, and I don't know if you have an official name for it yet, but they have taken it over from Ed. So my question, Fred, is we look at this plant and we've heard so many rumors and problems and issues and personnel things and falsifying records and all these things that go through all kinds of different medias. But a plant that's built in 1966, is it worth continuing to upgrade, or is it something at some point we really need to look at changing or building something different?
there's very little here from 1966. The process, the treatment process that we use here at this time is very progressive. We treat for nitrogen and phosphorus to remove those. Our treatment goals, as I said, are much higher than what is listed in our permit. We did experience some problems that I'm aware of during 2019, 2020. I believe there was a period of time where the quality of our reuse water wasn't adequate and we stopped supplying it to the people that use it. But the cause of these problems were primarily because we were going through an upgrade at the plant, improving our treatment. And in order to do that, we have to basically take half of the treatment plant offline so that we can work on those components. So at that time, the treatment plant only was operating with half of their redundant units in operation. So the issues aren't so much with the type of plant that we have here or our ability to treat the water. We're constantly trying to improve it, and construction has an impact on what we do here because the water keeps coming. We can't turn it off to fix it. So we have to deal with it while we're going through these upgrades. And during that period, we were upgrading our main biological treatment units. So they were, one of the two units was offline for a significant period of time. And then when that one came back on, we went and emptied the other one to work on that. So that has an impact. And that's the issue that I was aware of that occurred in the last couple of years. I can't speak to anything before that. But we're getting ready, as I said, to do a project on the headworks of the treatment facility, and we'll have to go through the same thing. Half of the unit will have to be taken out of service while we replace those pieces of equipment, and then the other half has to be taken out to replace those pieces of equipment, because the entire plant is designed with redundancy. So if one piece of equipment goes down, we have a backup piece of equipment that can take over automatically and continue treatment, because we can't be without treatment at any time. I don't know if you're aware also, we have solar collection here, which we use to produce the energy that we use to treat the water. And we're also getting ready to start up a cogeneration project where we're going to take methane that's produced by the digestion of our wastewater solids and take that methane and generate more electricity to pay ourselves back for the energy that we use to treat the water. So that's going to save on your wastewater bills, because now we don't have to buy as much electricity from the utility. So we're trying to do as much as we can to be good stewards, and that's our goal.
Kelsey's got a question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, hi Fred. A number of times you've talked about the water hasn't been in a position to be used by the people who have permits, and so you've withheld it. And I just would ask that some of your consideration be that water still gets used, it still gets sent downstream.
Yes.
I mean, we have livestock and agriculture and children on our property, and whatever is insufficient to go to the folks who have permits, we're still receiving that water. And so I think what we feel just as a community downstream is that a lot of these decisions get made by the city upstream, and the ramifications are felt downstream. And
these aren't the results of decisions. As I said, when we're dealing with construction issues here at the treatment plant, the water doesn't stop. So if I have an issue with a treatment unit that goes bad, because stuff breaks. I mean, that's just the reality of things. Stuff breaks. The water doesn't stop coming to me. I can't turn it off. So we have to deal with it as best we can. And it's a difficult situation. And we get all kinds of pushback from our regulators that are regulating our flow, because we have to report to them any problems we have. And that's an immediate notification. So if we have an issue where a unit goes down that's going to impact the treatment of our discharge, we have to notify the state right away. And the state tells us what we have to do beyond that. We comply with their orders. But as I said, we have to deal with the problems that occur here. And there's only so much we can do when we have an issue. That's why redundancy is built into the facility, so that if one unit goes down, we still have capacity to treat. And we're not discharging raw sewage into the creek, because that can happen. It does happen. I've seen it happen in my career, where problems are so bad at a plant that they end up discharging raw sewage. A pump station is a very common occurrence. If you have a pump station that fails, water keeps coming to that pump station, but if it can't pump it out, it's going to spill. It's going to come out. It's going to discharge to the environment.
But I think Kelsey raises an excellent question, because understandably those things happen. But when that water goes down the river, it affects every community below it. And this is where we've asked for made the simple request of having the city saying, hey, we got real problems with water today, stay out of it. Those kind of things. So that's something we would love to work on. Now, Fred, I want to ask if you're familiar with constructed treatment wetlands.
Yes.
Yeah, and see, that's what we keep looking at as a solution, in all honesty, to that water that comes out of the plant that somehow, and I'm not sure where it's positioned or how it's going to work, but that be used as part of the cleaning process so that people downstream can have a little bit better assurance that their water isn't contaminated. And so that's something this group, and I think that that's going to be included in the Pipeline Coalition work as well, to see if that's possible to include that as part of the reclamation process.
That would be something that would occur downstream. It wouldn't be part of our treatment process. Because when it leaves the pipe, it has to meet our permit. Okay.
You know anything about the EPA standards for pharmaceuticals? Is that ever going to come out, or is it something still in the works?
I haven't heard anything. I've heard more about PFAS than I have about pharmaceuticals. Pharmaceuticals are at a much lower concentration in the wastewater. I'm not even aware of any studies locally on concentrations of pharmaceuticals. Primarily the way that has been addressed has been through local collection efforts, where you encourage your users not to flush unused pills down the toilet, that you turn them in and they're disposed of properly. So that's how I've seen that addressed, to remove it from the waste stream as opposed to treating it in the waste stream. It's the same way we address industrial wastewaters. We try and keep them from getting in our waste stream as opposed to treating them once they're in there, because it's much more expensive and difficult to treat them once they're in the waste stream. So we try to eliminate them through monitoring of industrial dischargers and commercial dischargers also.
Bobby?
Fred, there was an extensive study done of the wastewater treatment plants in Espanola, Los Alamos, and Santa Fe by the NMED, and I wonder if you have seen that, because it does cover all of the various things that are discharged by the wastewater treatment plant. And then part 2 of this is that we have no control over the pharmaceuticals that go into our water, because when people intake a drug, it gets peed out. And so it goes into the wastewater treatment plant and thereby goes into the water system. So that is, a bigger thing that I understand that that the funding to deal with that is limited. But to go back to the study, I hope you were able to access that or see it.
I haven't seen it at this point.
Okay. I have it on my desktop. I can send it to you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'll throw in, it's actually in the videos of these meetings from October of 2020. Patrick Longmire at NMED was the presenter on that.
Right. Excellent memory.
But the other question I was going on, Fred, following up with Carl's comment, what Efren and Mike had agreed to do is notify us, and then we can get it out with our vertical response e-blast. If there is a compliance issue with the water quality coming out of the plant, so we can just as you let the state know, we can let all the downstream users know in about 2.5 seconds. Might be, well, it's something that we think would be really important to do. Mike Dozier was saying, of course, his kids play in the river down there. So he definitely had an interest in that. I think Jay's kids do too, and I do. So if you could let us know if there's an issue, that would be great, so I don't die.
Just to amplify on that too,
I
Fred.
really
it's not
take
just-
issue with your statement about not die, okay?
I know,
Because
I'm sorry, that's true. So
we
that
do
we
not
don't get sick.
discharge. We do not discharge any toxics here. We don't receive any toxics. So they can't pass through the plant. That's, as I was speaking
Right,
before,
okay,
we
but-
monitor our industrial dischargers. We don't allow that to be discharged to our system.
Darren has a question. Darren, go ahead.
If I might, I just want to bring us a little closer to a sphere of reality here, is that the Santa Fe River, the lower Santa Fe River in particular, isn't just livestock watering. It isn't just a nice place to go cool off and wade, dip your toes and play for the day. That's the irrigation water for my community. That's drinking water for my community. And we're not talking about toxins or you dropped a barrel of PCBs or whatever. Thanks to God, we haven't lost a child in this village since the 1990s due to the E. coli coming down from that plant. But that's because of the vigilance of the community and our reliance on our wells and just being able to get what information we can judge the float coming down the canyon to see if it looks safe or not, to close the head gate or stop the infiltration gallery or do what we got to do. So just to keep in mind that we're not just talking about recreational uses of that water. We're not just talking about bloody golf courses. We're talking about nuestra vida, the water, which is our life.
That's why I do this.
This is Maria. I just want to, talk about something that Carl mentioned a little while ago about constructed wetlands and the, that alternative method of filtering out some water. And there, we've had lots of conversations about the wetland conditions downstream of the wastewater treatment plant. And they are there right now. They exist. And they are doing a very similar job to what constructed wetlands are doing. There probably needs to be some management if we're going to consider that wetland environment to be part of our buffering mechanism. There might need to be some removal of sediment or something to help with the water quality downstream. But I do just want to start to have the conversation about the existing wetlands are doing a lot of that filtering for us. The willows are there, the beavers have moved in, they've created a situation that really is helping to filter and clean the water, maybe not entirely exactly how we want it, and we do need to still work to remove some of that, but there is that there that could be a first step.
As I stated earlier, we have to treat to our discharge permit at the pipe. So any effect that the wetland has downstream is a bonus. But we have to treat it to meet the uses of the creek as they're defined by the federal government, since EPA issues our permit, not the state, regardless of whether there's wetlands down there or not. So, as I said, our goal is to eventually discharge water that you can pull out and treat and drink immediately. We want to treat it to a potable water level. We can't at this time, but that's our goal. Direct reuse is our goal.
Addressing what Maria said, and I think that's important that you bring this up. The questions we have and will continue to have is, we do need to have the soil tested in that area. We do need to have local nearby wells tested. We do need to test the water that comes out of the wetlands to see what's in it, because it's one of the things that it had been managed over the last 25 years, I think is how long it's been there since the Wild Earth Guardians have put it in. It hasn't been managed. It's not one of those things that if you look at constructed treatment wetlands, it is managed on a regular basis. Things are cleared out on a regular basis. Plants are replaced. all those kinds of things. And whatever good that wetlands does now is something that nobody really is sure about. I mean, when the city talks about it, describes it as a nutrient sump, it certainly causes us some concern. So I appreciate the information. I think it's important that we really do some serious testing of those areas. And so, Fred, thank you so much. Really appreciate your contribution. I think you've heard a lot of different things. I'm sure they're not new to your particular profession, but there are some sensitive cultural issues that may be unique to your experience. And so we look forward to working with you. We're not a bad group of folks. We're just interested in doing what we can to make sure that the river runs well. And I mean, our kind of motto is a steady, certain flow of clean water in the river is what we're after. And so that's something that is kind of an ongoing goal of ours. So thank you again, Fred. Really appreciate it and look forward to working with you in the future.
Well, thank you for inviting me. And if any of you are interested in viewing our treatment plant, you're welcome to come down and call me up. I'll give you a personal tour of the place.
That may be a part of our tour. We'll see. So we'll talk about that in a second. So I want to go into an update on the Pipeline Coalition, where we're at in terms of the return flow pipeline project, city, county, because it's really an important moment, I think. We are in the process of looking at creating an RFP for the facilitator who's going to oversee the stakeholder involved planning process. And we have a number of people from the coalition who have volunteered to be part of that group. And I wanted to open up from anybody from the collaborative if you want to be part of that review committee. It's an interesting time. And I think that what we've done, we've had 2 meetings so far with Lucy Moore in terms of coming up for the information for the scope of work and for the qualities we wanted in the scope of work for the planning process, but also the qualities we wanted in the facilitator. And so I don't know if you all know, but Angeli Bean has left county and gone to work with the, what's it called, Western Resources folks. And so that's going to slow things down just a bit because she was kind of spearheading everything. But I've been in touch with John Dupuy, and we're looking at probably early March is when we're going to start doing the review of the RFP. So if any of you would like to be part of that process or be involved, please let me know, and I'll make sure to include you. Tricia Snyder has volunteered so far, and a couple other folks, and I think we'll come up with a pretty good product. And one of the things I want to do once we have the RFP in place is to share it with both the collaborative and obviously with the Pipeline Coalition members. And real quickly, he wasn't able to join us today, but Sterling Grogan, who's an ecologist, has decided to join our group. And I'm looking forward to having an ecologist as part of our membership. So he his wife had a doctor's appointment this morning, so he wasn't able to join us, but that's something looking forward to the future. So the RFP is absolutely important that we get this right, get the right person to oversee the process, and get a really good facilitator who's able to reach out. And I'm going to repeat myself. I just want to let you know, and I think, I'm not sure, Darren, you heard this, but I've been able to reach out and contact Mark Mitchell, who is the new chairperson of the All Pueblo Governors Council. And so he and I are going to talk early next week. I actually know him. When I was at Sunrise Springs, we took people for dances up to Suki, and he took me on a very absolutely fascinating tour of the Pueblo. So it's he's a good guy, and I look forward to working with him. When I think back, it's going to make our Pueblo connection. Knock on wood that we'll have an opportunity to really have them engage and participate in our process. So that's a quick update on what's going on with the Pipeline Coalition. Okay, now one of my ideas I have some wild ideas, but this is one I think is really important. And I've got something that's going to be able to help us with it. But one of the things we get asked about a lot is a tour of the area, a tour of the lower watershed. And there are a number of stops that would be pretty cool to do. And I have someone, and I'm not sure if Duncan Sill, who used to work with the county, has offered his services at no charge. But what I need to do is get together kind of a subcommittee that we can identify which spots we want to kind of be a part of the tour. Is it the treatment plant? Does that be a stop? The Kaya Deborah, is that a stop? But I really would like to be able to work with a small group of folks. So if you're interested, just go ahead and email me. You don't have to commit right now. You can think about it, but just email me, because I think there'll be an opportunity to really kind of shed some light on the people and interesting folks in the area. And I've even got Jose Varela Lopez is going to be part of that tour. So that was a little bit of a coup for me, because he's sometimes not as, he's a little reluctant sometimes to do certain things, but he's committed to it. So I think that's good. I'm going to get Alonso Gallegos to do Tres Rios, and obviously, Darren, you can pick out some folks from La Bajada. But I really want to be able to show the faces and locations that we're talking about. So it's not some abstract, who are those folks down the river kind of stuff. So that's something, again, if you're interested in being part of that, please let me know.
I would suggest, though, right off the bat, that for the sake of reducing the carbon footprint of the tour and also avoiding sovereignty and access issues, that La Bajada can be seen very well from the top of the mesa, from the bird's eye perspective, the entire bosque, as the Santa Fe River comes out of the Cañada from the Bocas de Cenetu, and then the bosque continues on down to the confluence with the Rio Grande, and you can see the whole thing from up there. So that's accessible, of course, up the old camel tracks, right up 56 Charlie, and then up there, and you can go all the way down old New Mexico 1 to the edge and see it all in kind of a bigger
Absolutely,
perspective. So we'll put
excellent.
that together.
Absolutely. And one of the things I do want to include is El Rancho de los Condrinas, because I think that is an example. I've already talked to Sean Paul Hilo there, but that's just an example of what water does and what's happened there and their kind of challenges and the history of water in that area. So that's exciting. I like that idea, Darren. Just made me think, can we get somebody to fly over or to do anyway, I'll think about that. But if you want to be part of that, just let me know. Okay, Well Owners Groundwater Conservation Outreach Program. This is something I mentioned just briefly earlier. And this is something that's coming out of the Water Policy Advisory Committee. But one of the things we want to do is reach well owners. So how do you reach them? I mean, it's not like there's some directory you can go to and say, oh, here are all the well owners in the area, and we'll contact them. So my thought is to see if we can't work with the Environment Department to do what they used to call water fairs, where they will test people's water for free, bring in your water samples and use that as an opportunity to educate people about their particular area. And I do agree with Bobby, it's got to be in maps, but it's got to be the geohydrological kind of area that they're in. But to translate that science language into something that people can understand and recognize that they are indeed in situations with limited water resources. And obviously it's got to be done in Spanish because in our particular area, if you look at Upper La Cienega, we have a sizable Mexican immigrant population, and they're not going to be able to read the things that we put out. And so there's got to be an effort to do it bilingually for sure. And so that's something that the YPAC, as we call it, the Water Policy Advisory Committee, is working on, and I'll keep you posted in terms of that. But I just think it's important that we start to educate people about limited water resources in Santa Fe County. And it's not just La Cienega, it's all over the place. William?
This is something that, there are no statistics for, but, as I talk to people who are great conservationists of water, they're pretty resentful of the fact that, here they are, saving every drop in the house, reducing stuff done outside, so on and so forth. And then the way the city has constructed its program is then it rewards the next developer from Texas. So there's a resentment, and I don't know if this applies so much to well owners, but it's like you do all this conservation and it doesn't help in the overall use of water.
Jay, I apologize. You've got your hand up for a while. So what's your question?
I had a question regarding who I would talk to and what the timeline is for the RFP review group, and who I would talk to there.
No, just talk to me. And there's no timeline right now. It's something because of Angeli's departure, it's kind of up in the air, but we're looking at probably early March to start working on that.
Okay, I'd like to get in touch with you and we'll talk about that.
Sounds good. Appreciate it. Okay, folks. Anything else? The other matters?
Oh, let me ask a question if I could of you, Carl. Has Cochiti, the Pueblo, been part of your tour? Have you?
No, that's a great question. This is where I'm hopeful that Mark Mitchell with the All Governors Pueblo Council will be able to.
The well, same with doing the well monitoring or well count.
Exactly. So it's just a starting point in terms of getting them involved. So I'm hopeful. Bobby?
My understanding is from Rich Schrader's emails to the group at some point that the governor is now Governor Quintana, who is the governor when we did our walk of the Santa Fe River, and he's an amazing, wonderful, easy person to work with.
Excellent.
That was my experience, and so I'm going to double check with Rich and make sure that that's the case. But I'm pretty sure that's what he said. So that would be great. And Carl, working with your guy at the All Pueblo Council would be good as well.
Let me clarify on that. Sorry to interrupt you, Bobby, but while we're fresh on it, is I think the advice that we'd gotten from Keegan was that Cochiti, Santo Domingo, and probably Pojoaque should be approached individually and with respect, but with copy to federal delegation and APCG. The problem now in the unified statements and that with all Pueblo Council of Governors is they're being used as a one-stop shop for contact with the Pueblos, and it is in fact a slight to the new governor, Philip Quintana, who should be addressed with your gladness that he's been appointed by the tribal council this year, et cetera, et cetera. However, okay, so, but let's reach out to the respective governors first, and then their other colleagues on that council of governors, I think was the point of etiquette or decorum that we were guided toward.
Good. But one other thing about Cochiti is that Cochiti needs to be approached about the wetlands project thing, with Jan, Willem, and Adrienne, and that whole deal. So that
I can speak to that. I'm part of the Wetland Action Plan team, and we have had all of those conversations about reaching out to many different folks, including Cochiti specifically, and also Tasuke and several different tribal folks are on our list. So thanks, we got it.
Oh, good. Thanks, Maria.
I just wanted to ask this question that Christy had asked. in the chat, when the daily water volume is reduced by half and there's going to be enough, is there going to be enough flow to maintain water cleanliness? Does anybody have insight on that since Fred has left the room?
The last answer that we got from Bill Schneider, City Water Resources Manager, on how that was going to play out when we were pondering the 50% reduction. There were two clarifications from Bill. One was that it wasn't necessarily a 50% reduction in flow in the stream. This is the semantics. It was a possible 50% reduction at the discharge pipe, which Fred was talking about, the responsibility for treatment ends, right? But during the course of that discussion, a lot of the talk about diverting the water and increasing the, I don't know where it got to this delineation between native water and BDD water or whatever, but there was supposed to be some increase in it that somehow diluted the effluent load so that magically you'd be getting better quality water if they were only putting 50% of the volume back out. I don't know if that's just a math trick or what, but that was the last answer we really got.
Okay. Sounds kind of hard to follow exactly that logic. Okay. Thank you, Darren.
All right. Any other matters from the board, the public?
If I could, I would just like to keep this being the I guess eastern demarcation of the Caja del Rio Plateau. I'd like to keep that in front of everyone's mind. There are efforts, of course, that have been going on for years, but are starting to get some momentum toward preservation of the Caja and the associated watersheds. This again, it's unique for us in the Santa Fe River. And then we remind you from La Bajada being near the confluence, right, that we're all one connected community. So I expect to see bringing more agenda items for the collaborative forward that are related toward that effort. Coming up soon will be a joint county and city resolution for the preservation. And there was one question that came from a collaborative member that wasn't here regarding upgrades to power line transmissions proposed by Los Alamos National Labs up there. The real question, I'll pass on some stuff that I know, but is that the new section of line would pop out somewheres around, Old Pankey headquarters around there, around the 800 well, and then off into the Buckman Canyon. So you're not talking about another direct incursion into the adjacent communities in the Cañada, right? But it still has an impact to our cultural landscape on the broader level. And there's a lot of solidarity. Speaking about the All Pueblo Council of Governors among the Pueblos and among our communities that's been expressed over, again, another 10 years. But so I'll be looking for people to get back and raise their voices on that one again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else, folks? Thank you so much. As always, a great group of folks. Good to see you all. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Maureen. Thank you, everyone. Look forward to seeing you in a couple months. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.